In early 2014, the Black Sea region underwent a geopolitical shift so rapid it bypassed nearly every standard early warning system in the West. This fracture began in November 2013, as mass pro-Western crowds occupied Kiev's Independence Square during the Euromaidan protests. By March 2014, the instability had culminated in the Russian Federation moving to occupy and effectively annex the entire Crimean peninsula. By May, the collapse of central authority had reached the mainland, where heavily armed groups seized control of the east to form the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. In less than 6 months, an aggressive state seized thousands of square miles of territory and dismantled a neighbor's sovereignty without ever formally declaring war. Traditional statecraft failed to recognize this invasion in real time because it lacked the formal, symmetric military maneuvers the international community was trained to look for. Under the traditional Clausewitzian model, there is a clear demarcation between diplomacy and armed conflict. This legal tripwire, the threshold of war, triggers a global, symmetric response. But the 2014 operations utilized the third-wave model, a strategy designed to subvert this binary. Third-wave conflict substitutes formal national armies with denationalized proxy forces, psychological manipulation, and strategic information asymmetry. To understand the modern battlefield, we must deconstruct how Russia successfully executed territorial conquest by operating relentlessly just below the threshold of war. The 2014 operations represented the mechanical execution of a strategic doctrine that had been evolving in Moscow since the 1991 Soviet collapse. While the early 1990s favored Atlanticism and Western cooperation, Russian policy eventually shifted toward a hardline framework known as Neo-Eurasianism. Philosophers like Alexander Dugin cast Russia not as a European or Asian nation, but as the distinct sovereign core of the Old World. This map illustrates the geographical imperative of Dugin's doctrine. Control of Eastern Europe is the prerequisite for commanding the Eurasian heartland. Vladimir Putin modernized this framework into a strategy termed the pragmatic consensus, or dynamic balance. The goal is a multipolar world order, maintained by aggressively subordinating post-Soviet states into a compliant near-abroad buffer zone. Preventing Ukraine from integrating into Western structures like the EU or NATO became a non-negotiable cornerstone of Russia's entire geopolitical survival doctrine. To execute a third-wave invasion without crossing the threshold, an aggressor must first weaponize the target nation's internal cultural and ethnic fault lines. This demographic map divides Ukraine into its 4 historic regions, each with distinct social attitudes. Unlike the rest of the country, the eastern and southern regions lack historic ties to the Kievan Rus and possess significantly higher concentrations of Russian-speaking populations. These specific regions also retained a localized economic nostalgia for Soviet-era industrial models over Western market liberalism. When the Euromaidan Revolution ousted President Viktor Yanukovych, the resulting state of anocracy removed the central authority holding these regions together. Russian intelligence immediately exploited this power vacuum to stoke regional paranoia and fund local secessionist movements. Hybrid warfare prioritizes the engineered fracture of a target's national identity over the immediate seizure of physical borders. This doctrine requires the physical seizure of territory without deploying a formal, legally recognized army. Russia achieved this through the privatization of force, exemplified by the appearance of the Little Green Men in Crimea. These denationalized actors were elite Spetsnaz regiments and motorized infantry brigades, specifically stripped of all identifying state insignia. Logistics were similarly decentralized, using local oligarchs and organized crime syndicates to finance the separatist proxy fronts. Deception, or maskirovka, shielded the kinetic operation. In August 2014, Moscow deployed a massive line of white trucks, claimed to be a humanitarian convoy. These trucks bypassed Ukrainian border controls to clandestinely deliver heavy weaponry and supplies to the proxy forces. By flooding international media with contradictory claims, the Kremlin created an information asymmetry that completely paralyzed Western decision-making. Stripping away state insignia and masking military logistics as humanitarian aid successfully divorced the kinetic action of a soldier from the legal definition of war. To halt the bloodshed, the international community relied on standard Clausewitzian diplomatic frameworks. These efforts resulted in the 2014 and 2015 Minsk agreements, involving the Trilateral Contact Group and major European heads of state. But these ceasefires lacked any enforcement mechanism to bind deniable, privatized proxy armies, rendering those traditional state-to-state treaties effectively toothless. The events in Ukraine map directly to Toffler's third-wave criteria, from denationalized proxies to economic malfunction. By saturating the gray zone with these tactics, an aggressor achieves strategic dominance while remaining out of reach of traditional retaliation. The ultimate goal of state rivalry, the destruction of an opponent's potential, remains unchanged. But traditional deterrence models are obsolete against an adversary whose geopolitical strategy is structurally designed to exist outside the boundaries of international law.